Have you ever noticed how just a few words can change the mood of an entire room? Maybe you've said something in passing, just being honest, just being real, and suddenly there's silence. People shift in their chairs, glance away, or change the subject. It's subtle, but it's there. And after a while you start to wonder, did I say something wrong? Or are people just too sensitive these days? The truth is, as we grow older, our words carry more weight than we sometimes realize. They can either pull people closer or slowly, quietly push them away. You see, our lives are full of experience, emotion, and wisdom, and that deserves to be shared. But the way we speak about ourselves, especially in these later chapters, deeply influences how others see us, and more importantly, how they feel around us. That's why in today's conversation, I want to gently talk with you about 6 phrases, common ones, that can create distance instead of connection, pity instead of respect, and loneliness where love should be. No blame, no shame, just some insight, a little awareness, and maybe a few small changes that can keep your relationship strong, your presence powerful, and your heart full. Let's ease into the first one together. You've likely heard it. Maybe you've said it once or twice yourself. I'm just a burden. It usually comes from a place of deep vulnerability. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're in pain. Maybe you've lost a little bit of the independence you used to take for granted. So when someone visits or offers help, it slips out. You don't need to worry about me. I'm just a burden now. But here's the thing. Those words, spoken even with the softest intention, land with a thud on the heart of someone who loves you. They might not say anything in that moment. They might even smile or nod. But inside, they feel helpless. They feel like no matter what they do, no matter how much time they give or care they offer, it's never enough to make you feel worthy. And that quiet guilt begins to eat away at the closeness you once shared. Let me tell you about Walter, a widowed father I met a few years ago. He was 76, living alone, and his daughter Claire would visit every weekend. She loved their time together, brought groceries, helped with chores, just like any caring child would. But every time she got up to leave, Walter would say, "I know you've got your own life to live. You don't need to be looking after an old burden like me." He thought he was being considerate. He thought he was saving her from guilt. But what he didn't see was how her face fell every time. She told me once, "It's like he doesn't see the love behind what I do. It's like I don't matter to him the way he still matters to me." Eventually, Claire started calling less often. Not because she cared less, but because each visit left her feeling defeated, like she was failing him. When you say, "I'm just a burden," what others hear is, "You shouldn't care about me." And that can quietly close a door you never meant to shut. So what can you say instead? Try something simple, something that speaks gratitude rather than guilt. "Thank you for being here. It means a lot." That one shift allows the other person to feel appreciated. It invites closeness without obligation. And most of all, it reminds them and you that love is not a transaction. It's a bond. And bonds at any age deserve to be nurtured with kindness, not sorrow. You're not a burden. You're a whole person with decades of stories, wisdom, and value. Don't reduce your life to a phrase that dims your own light. Speak in a way that reflects just how much you still have to give. Let's move gently to the next one. Have you ever said, "Back in my day," and then watched someone's eyes glaze over? You were probably just sharing a memory, offering perspective, a little nostalgia. After all, you've seen the world change in ways most people can't imagine. So you say it naturally, "Back in my day, we didn't do things like that." But what you may not realize is how that phrase, especially when used often, can sound dismissive or even judgmental to younger ears. It's a little like holding up a ruler from the past and measuring someone else's present against it. It doesn't matter if your intentions are kind. What they hear is, "Your struggles don't matter. Our way was better." Let me share a story. Eleanor is 69, a bright, thoughtful woman who adores her grandson Jake. He'd just started his first job out of college, was overwhelmed, unsure of himself, trying to find his footing. He came to her one day, opened up about how exhausted he felt, juggling long hours, new expectations, and no time for himself. She listened, then smiled and said, "Back in my day, we didn't complain. We just got on with it." It was meant to inspire toughness, to say, "You've got this." But Jake left that conversation feeling small, like his challenges didn't matter, like he'd failed some invisible test. He stopped sharing after that, not because he loved her less, but because he didn't feel safe being vulnerable around her anymore. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't share your experiences. In fact, your stories are a gift, but it's how you present them that makes all the difference. Instead of saying, "Back in my day," try something softer, more inviting. "I remember facing something similar once. Want to hear how I handled it?" That way, you're not correcting their world, you're connecting it to yours. You're offering a story, not a standard. And that approach keeps the door open for both generations to grow closer, side by side. Because whether you're 18 or 80, we all want the same thing: to feel heard, to feel seen, and to feel like our voice matters. Your stories have power. Share them in a way that lets others meet you where you are, not feel like they need to defend where they are. We've now touched on two phrases, "I'm just a burden" and "back in my day," that can, without meaning to, create distance. And we've explored how small shifts in the way we speak can lead to deeper, more meaningful connections. Let's keep going. There's another phrase that sneaks into our vocabulary when the days feel heavy and the world feels a little dimmer than it used to. Maybe you've whispered it under your breath when plans fall through, when pain sets in, or when life just doesn't feel the same anymore. What's the point? Those words can feel like letting out a long sigh, a way to say you're tired or that something just doesn't feel worth the effort anymore. And honestly, we all feel that way sometimes. But when this phrase becomes a habit, when it's said often enough, it begins to cast a shadow, not just over your mood, but over everyone around you. Let's pause there for a moment. When someone you care about hears you say, "What's the point?" Again and again, it doesn't just sting, it unsettles them. Because those words don't sound like frustration. They sound like giving up. And that can be heartbreaking to witness. I remember talking with Robert, a retired high school coach in his mid-70s. He had always been the lively one, the neighbor who shoveled everyone's driveway before sunrise, the man who brought laughter to every Sunday dinner. But after his wife passed, something in him dimmed. The spark that once lit up a room became quieter, smaller. His daughter, Megan, would call him every few days, trying to get him out of the house. "Come have dinner with us," she'd say. "Let's go to the park. The boys want to see you." And more often than not, he'd respond with a sigh and say, "What's the point?" At first, she insisted. She pushed harder, tried new things. But after a while, the energy it took to lift him out of that place became too much. Not because she stopped caring, but because she began to feel like nothing she did could reach him. And that's the quiet danger of those words. You may not mean for them to sound hopeless. You might just be tired. But to the people around you, those words say, "I've stopped looking forward to life." And that whether you realize it or not, can make others feel helpless, like they're watching someone they love drift further away. But here's the truth. Even if the world has changed, even if your body feels slower, even if your roles have shifted and your routine isn't what it used to be, your life still holds meaning. You don't have to be busy to be valuable. You don't have to be productive to be important. Your presence, Your quiet smile, your listening ear, your stories still matter more than you know. So when you catch yourself about to say, "What's the point?" try asking this instead. What would bring me a little joy today? Just that. It doesn't have to be big. Maybe it's a warm cup of tea on the porch. Maybe it's texting a grandchild. Maybe it's turning on your favorite old song and letting it carry you back. That one question has the power to reshape your entire day. And when you start showing even the smallest signs of curiosity, of willingness, of hope, it changes the way others show up for you too. It gives them a reason to keep inviting you in, to keep believing that their presence matters. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't even need to feel cheerful all the time. But asking that simple question, "What would bring me a little joy today?" is a quiet way of telling life, "I'm still here. I'm still open. I'm still reaching." And believe me, that energy is magnetic. Which brings me to another phrase, one that we often use without realizing the emotional wall it builds. You wouldn't understand. Now, at first it sounds reasonable, protective even. You've lived through things most people today haven't. Wars, recessions, losses, technology explosions. So many changes, so many adjustments. And maybe when someone younger asks about how you're doing, you hesitate. You think they wouldn't get it anyway. So you smile politely and say, "Oh, you wouldn't understand." But let's talk about what that really does. You see, that phrase doesn't just shield you, it shuts others out. It tells them, there's no point trying to connect with me because you won't get it. And even if that's not what you intend, it's what people often hear. Let me tell you about Margaret. She's 84. Lost her husband after 50 years of marriage. She's had some health issues. She doesn't get around as easily as she used to. Her granddaughter Lily is in her 30s. Bright, kind-hearted, full of questions and compassion. Every time she visited, she'd try to open a door. "Grandma, how are you really doing? Want to tell me a story from when you met Grandpa? Can I help you cook something from when you were young?" And Margaret, with a soft wave of the hand, would say, "You wouldn't understand." It wasn't said unkindly. It was just her way of keeping things simple, keeping the pain inside. But Lily eventually stopped asking, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't want to keep feeling like her presence didn't matter. That's what this phrase does over time. It pushes people away, not because you want to, but because you're afraid they won't understand the depth of your story. But here's the truth. Connection isn't built on understanding everything. It's built on trying. When someone asks, they're not looking for the perfect explanation. They're just trying to sit with you, to witness your story, to say, "I may not get it all, but I want to be here with you anyway." So instead of saying, "You wouldn't understand," consider this. "It's hard to explain, but I'd like to try if you're open to hearing." That one sentence does something powerful. It invites someone in. It says, "I'm not sure where this will go, but I trust you enough to let you walk with me for a little while." People don't need you to be polished. They just want you to be present, to let them care, to let them show up. Don't underestimate the love people are capable of giving, especially when you give them the chance to try. Let's take a breath here. So far, we've touched on 4 phrases, each one familiar, each one quietly influential. And with each, we've opened a small door, a shift, a new way to keep others close without losing your voice. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing. Willing to speak with tenderness, willing to share with hope, willing to stay open even when it's easier to retreat. Because whether you realize it or not, the way you speak about yourself sets the tone for how others engage with you. And sometimes, the smallest change in language can be the very thing that brings someone back into your life, or keeps them there just a little longer. So let's keep going. There's one phrase that slips out so casually, so quietly, You might not even realize the harm it can do. I'm too old for that. You might say it with a little chuckle. You might even say it to set boundaries or to sound humble. And yes, sometimes it might be true in a practical sense. You're not going to climb a ladder and paint the roof anymore. But that's not really what this phrase does. What it says, what it communicates, is resignation, finality. That a part of you has stopped reaching for something new. Let me share George's story with you. George is 83, a lifelong lover of music. Used to sing in a barbershop quartet back in the day. He still hums a tune when he washes dishes. Still taps his foot when the radio plays an old favorite. One day, a few friends in his community center decided to start a small choir. Nothing fancy. Just neighbors coming together to sing for fun. They asked George to join. "We'd love your voice. You've got the best ear for harmony." And without missing a beat, George smiled and said, "Oh no, I'm too old for that now." The offer didn't come again. Not because they stopped wanting him there, but because he had told them, without even realizing it, that his days of joining in were done. And it wasn't about the singing. It never is. It was about the laughter between verses, the sense of belonging, the joy of creating something together. All of that disappeared with a single sentence. That's what "I'm too old for that" does. It builds a wall where there could have been a bridge. Now, of course, there are things that change with age. We might not move as fast, stay up as late, or lift what we used to. That's not failure. That's just being human. But when you say, "I'm too old for that" to everything, new hobbies, friendships, technology, even joy itself, you begin to carve yourself out of the world you still belong to. There's a better way. Instead of shutting the door, try cracking it open. "That's new to me, but I'll give it a try." Or simply, "Tell me more about it." Those small phrases don't commit you to anything. They don't promise that you'll love it. But they keep the conversation going. They say, "I'm still here. I'm still curious." And curiosity? That's the secret sauce of staying alive. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, fully. When you show even a flicker of interest, people respond. They invite you, they include you, they share more of their world with you, and that keeps the connection alive. Aging doesn't mean stepping out of life, it means stepping into it differently. And often that difference brings its own kind of beauty. You're not too old for laughter, for learning, for discovery, for joy. You're not too old to be amazed again. And finally, we come to the phrase that perhaps hurts the most, both to say and to hear. "I don't matter anymore." It usually slips out in a whisper. Maybe after a hard day. Maybe after feeling left out. Maybe after scrolling past images of a world that feels like it's moved on without you. But these words, these 5 heartbreaking words, have the power to undo years of connection if they're repeated often enough. Let me introduce you to Helen. Helen was 81, once the steady rock of her family, the one who hosted Thanksgiving, bandaged skinned knees, remembered every birthday without fail. But as her health declined and the family grew busier, things changed. Fewer calls, shorter visits. And somewhere along the way, Helen started saying things like, "I don't matter anymore. I'm just taking up space." Her son would try to reassure her. Her grandchildren would bring her flowers. But each time she said it, they felt a little more helpless, a little more unsure of how to help her feel seen. And eventually, they came around less. Not because they didn't love her, but because they didn't know how to fight against that constant message. That they were failing, that she was fading, and there was nothing they could do. That's what those words do. I don't matter anymore. They don't just express your pain, they tell others that no matter what they try, it won't be enough. But here's the truth. You do matter. You matter not because of what you can do, or how many people call, or what role you fill. You matter because you exist. Because your life has shaped other lives. Because your story is still unfolding, even if it's quieter now. You matter because the world is better with you in it. So instead of saying, "I don't matter anymore," try this. "Sometimes I feel invisible, but I want to feel connected." That sentence is honest. It doesn't sugarcoat the pain, but it invites someone in instead of pushing them away. It gives your loved ones something to respond to, something they can do. It says, "I'm here, I'm struggling, but I want to be reached." And trust me, there are people, more than you know, who want to reach you. There's no age limit on love, or relevance, or belonging. Yes, the pace of life changes. Yes, sometimes we feel left behind. But the more you speak your worth, the more the world reflects it back to you. And so, as we bring this conversation to a close, I want to gently ask you to look back over the words we've talked about, not with guilt, not with regret, just with kindness. Maybe you've said one of these phrases recently. Maybe you've said all of them. That's okay. What matters most isn't what you've said before, but what you choose to say next. Your words carry power, even the quiet ones. They shape how others see you. And more importantly, they shape how others feel around you. So my challenge to you today is this. Let go of just one of these phrases. Pick the one that resonates the most, or the one you know slips out too often, and replace it with something softer, something that leaves the door open. That lets people in. That invites love, rather than silently turning it away. And if you'd like to take this even further, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me one thing you learned today, and how you plan to use it in your life. I read every one of your messages. They mean more than you know. If this video spoke to you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep creating content that informs, uplifts, and supports you in living your fullest life at any age. Because you still matter. Because your presence is a gift. Because there is still so much of you the world needs to see. Here's to speaking with hope. Here's to letting love in. And here's to living your best life, right here, right now. We'll see you next time.